evening, everyone, and welcome to the second edition of Employ to Innovate, where we talk about any and everything to do with business acceleration. And with me on our panel, we have three of the accelerators with us to discuss growth through wisdom, reasons why you need to hire pre-retirees. So here we go. So on our panel, we have Dennis, and I'm going in clockwise. We have Dennis Vincencio, we have Kelly Sturgakis, and we have Brian Adelson. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the broadcast.
Welcome.
Hello.
Excellent. So now what we're here to talk about is really about hiring pre-retirees and the benefits that they can serve our small and medium-sized businesses. And to get the conversation going, I'm actually going to pose some questions. The way the broadcast is set up, we're going to pose some questions, and we're just going to jump in and really give our viewpoints. You do not have to agree with each other. So it can get cat and mouse if we wish to, but and we're going to have fun with it. So on that note, are we ready with the first question? Shall we pose the first question? Give us a moment, and here it is.
Many feel a zest for life. Yet when it comes to the workplace, 55 seems to be that age where workers are made to feel, well, washed up or antiquated. Why is that?
So what a question. So why do we get at 55 and up start to feel really like the furniture in a workplace? Who's ready to jump in and tackle this one?
I'll jump in. I think it's just the rapid pace of technological change and the emphasis on technology in the workplace kind of heightens the difference between the knowledge base of the younger workers and the more mature workers. So, business is sort of downstream from education. So we have an educated workforce. I mean, even high school graduates are advanced when it comes to technology. So I think it feels, different. The societal beliefs from maybe 50 years ago haven't really caught up with the knowledge-based economy of today. And that combined with, you have the mature workers with the younger workers, so technology-based, it makes it seem like maybe 55 is washed up or antiquated.
So, I agree technology comes into play, but I think about communication and generationally speaking, different generations communicate in different manners. So the example I like to point to from the technology end of it is social networking. In the younger workforce, especially that workforce that grew up with a cell phone, with social media, that is a method that they use to communicate. And the older workforce in general didn't have that growing up. Now, some utilize it to some certain degree, but let's admit it, the older workforce may not be as comfortable with that particular form of communication. And communication in business is key. I think that's one of the things that's out there. Older workers tend to stay longer in businesses. So maybe that older worker's been around longer, maybe is made to feel a little, their techniques and ideas are a little antiquated. Brian, what do you think?
Well, I would agree with all that, but I also think it comes from, purely an emotional or psychological perspective too, is that when you start to get to that age and you start to think about, kind of the end of your career and moving on to other things, and you might even feel that you're taking up spots for somebody that's younger, that's trying to move up the ranks. So I do think that it's psychological, that you start to feel like, you're ready to move on, or you're coming to the point where you don't want to run as hard as, some others. And you start to feel like, you might be even in the way. And that might be from the story you're telling yourself. But as others start to look at you, they're getting to the point where they think, think about what we've been taught our whole lives. You retire at 60 years old. You start drawing Social Security, and you kind of basically, go off to greener pastures. So I think that, those that I talk to in this age group, start to feel like, they're ready to move on, even though they might still feel great. I think psychologically they start to, feel like it's ready to move on.
Yeah, good point. Those messages, have been coming at us for years, right?
Well,
Right.
that's it. I think that people start to use those kind of words like old and, mature and all of that. And I know for one, when it's applied to me, I'm always like, speak for
Who
yourself.
are they talking about?
Yeah. Speak for yourself, right? So I really think it has to do with mindset. But there's two things, like all of you said some amazing things. The two things that really stick to me is that when we think about technology, I think the older generation uses technology differently. I don't think all of them are gun shy to use technology. I think they use it differently. On top of that, I think the speed at which technology is moving is sometimes quicker than the mature adults can keep up with. And I think there's a responsibility on businesses who have pre-retiree employees is to keep them up to date on the technology and not have them to beg to take a course and have it paid for and justify that it relates to your job. I mean, there's some rules around some of those things that needs to be laxed a bit to ensure that everybody in the company stays up on the quick movement of technology. And sometimes even the business is antiquated in its movement with technology. So that's one point I want to put on the table. Do you guys want to speak to that a bit?
Yeah, and I think you, Jen, you bring up a good point about direction and communication, and it's a two-way street. And I agree that it doesn't matter whether you're an older or a younger or whatever position you're in, is that part of when you come into a company or you're in a company that's dynamic and trying to move and trying to grow, is that your value proposition as an employee, I mean, is that you need to stay up with current trends, right? So if the business has a social, is going to use social media, social networking as a tool to grow their business, myself as an employee, I should understand what that is. The employer's job as the leader of the business needs to communicate that downwards to the employees, I think. And I agree with you. It's a two-way street, and communication works both ways, from the employee to the employer and employer to employee.
And the second point I want to put on the table is, as you grow older, your priorities change. And quite frankly, that's for everybody consistently. But the way, your priorities change. And I think, Brian, you spoke to that very nicely. And when you get to a certain age, the things that, you would put up with when you were young are different. The things that you strive for when you were young are different. And so for sure, the priorities change. And that's another kind of pulse that businesses need to also stay aware of. There's enough stats out there to show that they should be moving along that trajectory, also in line with the workers and the staff that they have that hit that point of their life. Thoughts on that?
Right. I don't think it's, this discussion is really about, going after that pre-retiree or retiree to get them into the workforce. But I don't think a lot of the things change for how you would, what we talked about in our last presentation of, attracting, onboarding and retaining. It really comes down to communication and making sure that your vision is in line with your employee's vision. So, we'll get into some other discussion questions, but when you're working with somebody in this demographic, find out what they really want and see if you can provide that to them. It's really just about, do you want to keep growing and moving on and trying to go for promotions, or are you ready to start to transition and maybe use the skill sets that you have to help us? Because we're focusing on small business owners. The resources and you could leverage the skill sets that a lot of these people in this pre-retiree group have, and they may want to just give back to you. And it can be a huge resource that you're overlooking. But it comes
it's not one
from
size fits all. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's not one size fits all. I mean, every person in this age group that we're discussing has different goals, and some may want to scale back. Some, are ready to keep going. It's different for every person. And
I think when a business is in transition, right? So you're in you're a business and you're growing. Maybe you've reached some challenges, and sometimes you tend to think about, like, we need to do something a little differently. And one of the things that maybe the younger workforce brings is an idea of that freshness, right? That fresh ideas, the enthusiasm. And the older workers tend to be a little bit more, hey, let's think about it, because they have the experience of seeing what happens when you move too quickly. The real trick here is trying to understand that you can have balance, right? We talk about, diversity in the workforce is a big conversation right now, but it's not, age diversity is also an important topic. And I think that topic today is really what we're talking about, is how do we leverage that? How do we get the best out of everybody that's there?
And that's a beautiful segue into question number 2. And we'll just go to question number 2 and continue the discussion. Here we go.
The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that workers ages 55 to 64 across all industries stayed with companies 3 times longer than workers ages 25 to 34 years old. In our last broadcast, we reported the average cost of hiring was in the vicinity of $4,500 per hiree. Given those numbers, why would companies decide to narrow their workforce from the tried and true down to net new? It seems a bit like reversing the 80-20 rule, no?
And there, so what are your thoughts on that? The 80-20 rule tells you work with the ones you have before you try to get new ones, right? And it seems like it's reversing that. What are your thoughts?
So in the older business models out there, you used to think that if you brought somebody in new with not a lot of experience, they were relatively cheap to get, right? And you could train them the way that you wanted to have them trained, right? So they didn't come with any preconceived notions. But think about those numbers out there, is that if the older worker is going to stay with you longer, that younger worker probably is going to be more mobile. They may not stick around as long as some of the older workers that are out there. So when you do the cost analysis of that, you can even look at that older workforce and say, you know what? I can keep them a little bit longer. That cost of hiring at $4,500 plus that 3 to 6 month, let's say, training cycle that it takes to get an employee up to speed and running in most businesses. When you spread that out over, let's say, 5 years to 8 years, as opposed to 3 to 5, that little bit of extra cost to pay from experience might work for you. That's kind of the way that I look at it from a cost benefit analysis.
Right. And if those statistics match out where, the older population is going to stay with you longer, when you're hiring somebody younger, their chances of staying with you long term are probably non-existent. And they're going to move quicker, they're going to be more spontaneous, they're going to take a job offer potentially for more money. And this is going to be something you're going to have to keep up with, where if you have somebody who's a little bit more mature and willing to stay with you, again, you're going to, as Dennis just said, you're going to get a lot more out of that person than you would from, hiring 2 or 3 people, having to retrain and those kind of things.
Yeah, I think longevity just isn't a value that, or it's a value that's low on the list of priority for businesses. And I think if you really look at across the board what businesses, are looking for, they are looking for, in many cases, a small to medium business owner probably looking to younger generation who are more technically savvy than they are in the first place. And then, we all naturally associate the youth with renewal and energy and revitalization. So, I think those things are all in play.
So I think maybe Jen, you can weigh in on this, but I know that we've had this discussion as the accelerators, is that what we propose, and one of the things that we work on with our clients, is that diversification of the workforce is kind of the key, right? Yes. So a diverse workforce, and it has to be part of a plan, right? So the small to medium business owners can look at this as part of a plan to integrate age diversity in the workplace, gives you that solid foundation. And I know that some of you business leaders out there may not have, you're so embedded in your business right now, it's hard for you to see that. And how do you implement that? And Jen, maybe you can talk a little bit about your experiences with that view, because you've had some great ideas.
Well, I've seen a lot going into the different workflows as a consultant. So you've seen a lot. And one of the things actually that amazes me is what someone coming in sees that the business doesn't see. And I'll give you a perfect example. When I go into businesses, even as a consultant, and I start to see lookalikes, I don't know if you know what I mean. You go in and you realize everybody here looks alike. Why is that? And it's stark, but to the people that are in it, they don't see it till you mention it, right? And I think that a company now needs to, and it's even more so, since 2020, that has become tried and true. Companies have to start putting a solid, diversified, and I don't mean just color of skin and things like that, diversified lens on their hallways, right?
Well, we talk a lot about
hallways look like. Do they have female of different ages? Do they have males of different ages? Do they have opportunity in terms of the proliferation of what encompasses the human side of things, right? Whether that's skin color, culture, whatever. What does diversity mean for a company, and how can you start implementing it? And I strongly believe that small and medium-sized businesses can do so much on this front, way better than a bigger business. It takes a long time to make those types of changes in a large business, but a small to medium-sized business can implement these practices and policies and carry them through and make them flexible as things flex, and really create that kind of dynamic environment that when you walk in, you feel welcomed, you feel in place, in the right place, and you feel, there's something you can connect with easily. And that is not always the case. And that's certainly been my experience consulting, going into government, private sector, manufacturing, doesn't matter. It hasn't always been the case.
Well, in general, right, we hear a lot about diversity in terms of how people look, but not so much about, cognitive diversity and what that type of balance can bring to a business. I think that's where we're different as a group. We talk about it in terms of cognitive diversity, I think. And so, different age individuals can bring something completely different, a different set of knowledge to the workplace. Younger workforce may be well versed in the newest technology, but the more mature workers will bring the experience and wisdom that comes from the experiences that they've had over their long careers. So definitely multi-generational work groups will promote knowledge transfer, retention. It'll balance out the emotional needs of the workers. Let's not downplay the mentoring opportunities, both mentoring and reverse mentoring.
And I think a key word that we have heard, we talked amongst ourselves on as well, and it's starting to also come out in education in the workforce, is biases. And I think, Dennis, you had you had some really key views on it. So did Brian. So I'd like to hear your views on the whole bias aspect and how we self-manage that to try to ensure that it is not applied in practice in what you deliver from a business perspective.
Brian, so are you talking about our bias or the employer's bias?
Well, bias comes from the individual, and it then gets applied in the workplace, right? Unintentionally many times, but right. It's there. So how do we manage those types of things? How do we become cognizant on it from a bias? Because some aspects of this has to do with bias.
With regard to age, we're referring to.
Yeah.
Right. And it goes back to just the words you use. We've changed from old to mature. I think yesterday, even in practice, we were talking about the silver, gray-haired, employees and those kind of things. That's why I did cut my hair today, to get rid of it. But I do think there's a... Yeah.
And Brian, I'm anxiously waiting for mine to grow out.
Yeah. I do think there's a bias, but the interesting thing is, I think it's when I do some mentoring at the high school level for Future Business Leaders of America, and I really believe that those young adults really appreciate the guidance that we come in and provide. And we come in a few times a year and we do these mentoring sessions and coaching sessions. And I think they eat it up. And so again, as a small business owner, if you've got, young adults, high school age kids, and then, maybe some newly graduates from college or interns, you can leverage these older employees to help mentor them, give them some guidance, give them some fulfillment, give them some projects that they can work on with the younger generation. And all of that's just going to increase the workplace environment, make everybody a little bit happier. But I think that would be the bias. The bias would either be that those individuals are getting ready to retire and they don't want to work hard and they're set in their ways and they can't learn anything new. I mean, that's a true bias. And I think we have to get away from that. And especially as technology changes, even though it's rapidly changing, the ability to learn it becomes quicker. So, apps change and they adjust, but we are getting a little bit more capable to make those changes. In the old days, you'd have a completely new software. Today, software kind of iterates, right? It just keeps improving upon itself, but they don't really totally change so drastically that it would be hard to learn the new features in it. So I think the bias would be we have to erase that older workers they're ready to retire. They don't want to work anymore. They don't want to give back. They just want to they want to get paid a lot of money. And I think that bias it can be damaging when you start looking at who you're going to hire.
Well, and I agree with those points, but when I think about bias, and one of the things that businesses that I've worked with in the past and are currently working with, when we talk about bias, what I try to get especially business owners to recognize is that we all bring a certain amount of bias to our daily life, especially to the workplace. And if we're going to overcome these biases, we kind of have to recognize it and say it potentially could be an issue. How we deal with our biases in our interactions is really the key. Okay. And I think that's one of the things. And you can overcome your own personal bias by experience. In a lot of cases, recognizing that, I look at an older worker and I'm thinking, boy, they just don't move as fast, and really the question becomes, okay, are all the older workers like that? Because that's not the case. I think you can have workers that are slower moving that are not older, right? And in some cases, depending on the job, you might want somebody who is very thoughtful and is very meticulous, right? So a lot of cases in business, we talk about finding the right seat on the bus for that particular employee. And one of the things that we talk about is that especially in corporate America, there is a track where you can move an employee up and up and up and up. And one of the issues that comes in is that there's only so many people that are going to be at the top. So a well-run company that understands the cost benefit of keeping employees is that you have to be able to move people up as they want to move up, but also you have to be able to let them move down. And that's part of the planning that a group can bring to you, especially like the accelerators, is that we can look at some of the things, like Jen said, from the outside looking in and help you develop a plan on those types of issues, especially when it comes to, how do we overcome bias? How do we diversify our workforce? I think that's the
and what I like is not only can we help you develop a plan, we can bring some excitement in developing that plan, because there is indeed it truly is an opportunity, and to be able to see that and bring that excitement within the organization to actually try to create a blended environment that works for everybody is massive. And, the ability of the accelerators to come in and do that for you is awesome. So I love that you mentioned that, Dennis. Kelly, you've been quiet. Anything to add?
Well, we recently had a conversation about this too, when you talk about age bias, and about, the younger workers, younger people may have not had a lot of experience with older people. And I'll let Dennis tell the story about, his when he was growing up, and then I'll sort of piggyback on that, because it makes a lot of sense at what we're talking about right now.
So I think, Jen, I don't know what you feel like. I think that if we go to the next question, we can kind of delve into that issue a little deeper, because I think it speaks to the core of what we're kind of working against and trying to overcome here, in my opinion.
And that was my intent. So okay, so on that nice chuckle, let's go to the next question, which is an interesting one.
What can it mean to be over 55 for the individual and society at large?
So
it means different things to different people.
Different things to different people. I'll let Dennis tell his story, and then we'll all jump in, because I even got an experience just yesterday and about a discussion, and I'll bring it on to show you just some of the things that are occurring to kind of exacerbate this problem. So go ahead, Dennis.
So when I was growing up, one of the things that was important in my growing up, my culture, let's say, my experience as a young person, was the concept of a multi-generational household, right? So when I was growing up, we always had somebody living with us, an older relative, for various reasons in their life. I had my great-grandfather living with me when I was very young. So I experienced that basically almost from the time I was born all the way to the time I left school. Now, in my peer group at my current age, a lot of what I see is a lot of my friends do not have that multi-generational household anymore. Their grandparents or the great-grandparents, live in another state away. You've moved to another state. So I think in certain instances, we've lost that multi-generational household. The experience of what it brought to me, though, is that I look at my people who are a little bit older than me, especially in that atmosphere, and I look to that wisdom, right? So I always had thought about, what can somebody bring to the table in that group, no matter, if they're older or not. So the older worker in multi-generational homes tend to be a little bit more revered for their experience. And I think everybody can bring a story about that. But I think that's important in the workplace, if you can build that multi-generational workforce, right?
Absolutely. Kelly, your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I kind of relate what Dennis just talked about too. When I was in high school, my mom worked for a retirement home, which was in walking distance from the high school that I attended. So after school, me and my siblings would go to the retirement home, and some of the individuals there were, my age today, or in their 60s. Some of them, maybe with a disability or whatever. So we would go there and help, take them for a walk, and we became fast friends with these patients. And we would write letters to their family members out of state while they dictated what they wanted us to say. We would take them for walks. We would help them clean their rooms. And before long, I was seeking advice. I don't know if I would have, gotten through high school without that experience, because they would, tell me, I'd tell them all of, the things going on socially at school, and they would give me advice, and I'd try it out the next day, and couldn't wait to run back and tell them how that worked out. And they were so excited to hear about what the younger, generations were up to. So all of that stuff, if you, want to translate what Dennis talked about, what I talked about, to the workplace, those types of things will occur. You'll have the more mature workers make, quick friends with younger workers, and they'll mentor each other, and that's possible
if you set it up correctly. And I think that's right. One of the things, Brian, you had talked about, I think in your experience, especially in your military experience, that kind of happens somewhat organically, right?
Yeah. So full transparency, I'm a month away from turning 55. So this really resonates with me. And many years ago, I actually read a book, and I wish I had grabbed it sitting on my bookshelf, but it's called Halftime. And it was written by a very successful, very wealthy person. And in the first 50 years of his life, he was trying to accumulate wealth, accumulate, grow fast, burn, and then in his And then when he hit 50, he kind of started to think, how do I give back? How do I leave a legacy? How do I, transfer, the skills that I've learned to other people? And that's kind of how I foresee it. And I think as a small business owner, if you can find somebody that's, has a similar, belief, you can bring somebody in and they can really help your business grow, and they're not really expecting a whole lot in return. We may have achieved a certain level of income, and now we're just trying to give back a few days a week to help somebody else grow and have the same life that we had. And, for me, being in the military as a military officer, retiree, I continuously get into conversations with young soldiers, young troops, young officers, and share with them, my experiences, whether it be in combat, leading troops, handling conflict and crisis. So it does kind of lead you to feel that others are interested to hear what your story is. And I think if you take it, and I try to be very cognizant of how I share my story. It's not, I did this and this is how you should do it. I try to share it in the experience level. Like, these are the things that I experienced, and then try to get them to either come up with a situation that they're in that they're trying to get through, and help them kind of, talk, question them so that they can come to their own conclusion. Because I do think that sometimes one of the challenges for an older person is they want to tell you how to do something, as opposed to kind of help you to navigate the difficult situations. And part of it, I think why I connect so well, and I think about both with my children, their friends, the individuals that I work with at Future Business Leaders of America in high school, some of the young military people, and even, I work with a lot of business owners today, and I talk to the young kids, that work in those environments. I think why I do it is I'm very interested to learn and to hear their experiences. I'm constantly asking them questions about the challenges that they face, and because the environment is completely different. And for an older person to come in, that's why Dennis said, if it's set up correctly, because for an older person to come in the wrong environment or with the wrong attitude, it can be it can have a negative impact on your business too. So having, the right attitude and, from my perspective as a 55 person, talking to somebody, I want to learn what their challenges are and then help guide them, because it's going, it's certainly different than what we face.
Well, certainly as someone that grew up in a culture in which the elderly were revered for sure, and highly respected, and they were the storytellers. That was the other key piece in my culture. And the memory I had shared earlier was me sitting down, because the kids would sit around the elders as they sat in their chair, or, in a higher, at a higher level. And we would sit around their laps as they told us different stories about their growing up. And sometimes it ended up forming into more Bible stories. Sometimes it was life stories, but it was, and you would just, my view was just looking up and listening to these stories. And they could repeat those stories 4 or 5 times. You never got tired of those stories. And there was one very special person in my life who died a little early. And that void has never, ever, kid you not, been filled. Has never, ever been filled. And so these are the things that we grew up where we were blended with our seniors, and we respected them, and you could not disrespect them, because if you disrespected the village lifestyle of rearing, is somebody would correct you. And the recent one that happened yesterday was, and this has turned out to be a trend, is there's a wedding, and the party has indicated no children at the wedding. And for me, I find that very bizarre. I respect it, but we grew up going to those types of things because that was where you interacted. That was where you got to know your aunts and your great aunts and your whoever, was when you came together at weddings. But now many of them have the rules, no kids. So again, the kids are separated from that old, from that generational, I don't know, how should I claim, generational awe, from the lessons that could be learned, from the guidance that could be gained. And I just find some of those trends are also what's fueling this. and the biases and the thoughts and everything. So that's my input on that line.
Yeah. So I think from business owners' end of it is that the key is you have all these, let's say that you have these obstacles that you're trying to overcome. And some of them may seem to be unsurmountable. I think the experience that we can bring it to this topic, especially, is that it's a plan, right? So you have to have a plan. And I always go back to the old saying that, failure to plan is planning for failure. So if you make it part of your plan, you develop a good plan about how you're gonna diversify your workforce, it can work. And the benefits that you're going to see from it, we're going to, we demonstrated this in a lot of ways. It's a cost benefit. It's an experience benefit. And again, like Brian said, and Kelly did, setting it up, right? So I think when you get down to the individual level, the individuals will embrace it if leadership embraces it, right? And that's usually what happens.
But one of the things I want to put on the table to talk about as well is just where society is at large with it, because there's a couple of reality things going on, realistic things that are going on. Those coming in because of going through the university and everything, they are starting their careers later. They are getting married later. They're having kids later. And so by the time they start all of that, they have a shorter time span of career than prior people had. And it no longer makes sense to have the retirement age, fixed at 65 or something like that. Because if you retire at 60 or 65, that costs, and then the lifespan has extended. So if you retire at that point now, with the lifespan hitting between 80 and 88, you are talking about someone spending 30 years of their life doing nothing. And that does not seem realistic to me. So some thoughts on those societal things that we should talk about.
Well, first, I want to just add something to what Jen said, and it made me think about sorry about that background noise. Really apologize.
This is why we're live. We make no apologies.
Kids in the household killing you. But I did want to say that, Jen, you make such a great point, and I think today one of the biggest challenges in our young adult population is communication. Right? They used to texting on the phone, emailing, and face to face. They have a lot of trouble. And when you were talking about the weddings. When my wife and I got married, we've been married now 31 years, we had all kids at the wedding. And I think about, like, when you're in those family gatherings, and we just had one, my uncle turned 81 a couple of days ago, and we had a family reunion, and I see the kids, the young kids, and we now have I have a great grand nephew. There's some, I think they're changing that name, but it's a grand nephew. So my niece's son. But when kids can be in that environment and learning and growing and feeling comfortable, it can't be, that's how you develop the bias, right? Where, kids are supposed to be seen and not heard, those kind of things. But if they're all part of that discussion, and I think about some of the funnest times I've had with families when we're all sitting around the dinner table and everybody's talking and sharing stories. And I think that helps them to then go out into the workforce and work with older adults and feel much more comfortable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and definitely to your point about, it being unrealistic maybe for people to retire at 65. I'm approaching the age that we're discussing here, and I have 6 more years before I'm sending twins off to college. So, retirement at 65 is not in the cards for me. And I don't think I would want to. Again, it's a personal choice. Everyone's at a different place. If you had your kids and they're already married with children, you may start wanting to step back. It's a very individualized thing. So when you talk about retirees, pre-retirees in the workplace, I think what we try to impart on small and medium-sized business is that if you're thinking about a bunch of different ways where you can engage those pre-retirees, some of them may, be looking for a couple of days a week where they can share their knowledge to the new people coming in, where they can, have a balance between, being with their grandchildren, being at work, or someone like me who, my youngest are just, getting more independent now. And so I'm ready to go in full time and start my second career. So I think it's a very individualized situation.
Okay, and the other thing that I want to put on the table is the fact that, Brian, you talked about where like just that whole nurturing piece of it. And I want to bring on the table that the reality of work in today's world is that we spend more time at work than sometimes we do with our own family. Granted, now we have work from home privileges, let's be praiseful for that. But when we were out and about and everything, we spent more time at work than we did with our own family. And so I think companies also need to recognize that fact and make a concerted effort. And I'm not saying that they don't, but some need to do it to make sure that environment feels like a home. That environment breeds communication. That environment breeds, the caring of each other as peers, right? And open discussion, ideology, all of these types of things are some things that companies need to do. And I think it's if your entire strategy, as we the accelerators are talking about, is comprehensive, proactive, with thought, with excitement, we can have all of these elements that really creates a beautiful, wonderful environment and culture to come to work and then go home to your other family. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think look, the current employment environment has shifted very dramatically since COVID. And businesses that I deal with, businesses I've talked to, are having a hard time finding workers. So, a lot of business owners and I said this in the last broadcast, a lot of business owners, a lot of you that are out there right now, you probably have a great sales force that's, staying in contact with their customers, trying to create an environment when a customer walks in that they feel welcome. I think you need to, in a competitive employment environment, just what Jenn was talking about. How do I create an environment that is attractive to potential employees that come in? And what we're saying today is that think a little bit out of the box. Is there something out there where I can attract an older workforce that is going to be what we've just shown to you, more stable, probably more cost effective, can bring that diversification that you may not have right now. So whether it's somebody within your organization that you need to maybe transfer down from less of a leadership position to a more mentoring position, or you need to bring somebody into that position. Those are things that you should be looking at, and that's the suggestions that we would bring.
So let's wrap up this and go into some stats. I want to talk about the stats to really ring home to the audience what opportunity looks like. We have some, we do for the audience that's looking on. If you have any of you are in the younger age group, I would love for you to put in some comments and give us your perspective on what we've talked about and what you think about it, as a whole. And while you're doing that and probably composing your comments, let me go to and show some of the stats because they really are amazing numbers.
According to the 2016 census, 25.3% of the workforce in Canada is 55 or older. That 25% is also valid for the U.S. as per the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And this is expected to progress into 2024, a mere 3 years coming. The numbers are staggering. In New York City alone, workers over age 50 exceed 700,000, or overall in the U.S., 39 million. In Canada, that number is 3.75 million. So there is a rich pool of opportunity for small and medium-sized businesses.
Staggering numbers.
So the reality is, for a small business owner, as Dennis said a few minutes ago, all businesses are struggling to find qualified workers that are going to be dedicated and they're going to come to work on their scheduled shifts. And this, we see it in the news just every day. And just this morning, we have a local amusement park. It's a tourist destination. And people come here from out of town just to go to that location. And they just announced today that they'll be closing, I believe it's on Monday and Tuesday, or Tuesday and Wednesday, but 2 days a week. They're only open for a few months in the summer, and they have to close because they can't get staffing. So this is a real problem that all businesses are facing today. And then you say 25% of the workforce is 50 or over, or 55 and over. So how do you set up the environment so that you can attract those employees to come into your workplace? And just so I can share, Jen, because you said something that I totally believe and share with a lot of business owners. Many times a worker or an employee spends more time at work than doing anything else. And today, even though we might have remote work, that doesn't mean that we are not in the work. We are now tied to our work constantly. Texts, emails, your phone's ringing at all hours of the night for work. And if that is a negative feeling, that can have drastic implications across your mental health in all areas of life. So if you can provide an environment where people are happy, fulfilled, have a purpose, and they're passionate about what they do, that also will spill over into all areas of their life. So providing that environment will really help. And that's going to, going back to our other presentation, we're employed to innovate, right? We want to get your employees, help you get your employees, and have the best environment that they can work in so that your business is as profitable and efficient as possible. If you can have a great environment, you're going to have great quality workers. Today, we're really talking about an untapped resource of 55 and over pre-retirees, and they are a huge, that's a huge number of the employees that are out there looking for jobs.
Absolutely. Across North America, we're talking about 42 million people and growing. The other key thing's growing.
Yeah, and if you go back to the presentation we did in June on small and medium-sized business recruitment policies and procedures and all of that, you could take a lot of that information and apply it here. The small and medium-sized businesses, have an advantage in this area because a lot of these types of thinking out of the box, recruiting and retention strategies, large businesses are not there yet. They don't move as quickly. They're not as flexible. A lot of the policies that they have currently, it takes time to change. So if the small and medium-sized businesses can really hone in on this, especially now where they're having such a hard time getting employees, and start thinking out of the box, there's huge opportunities.
I have a comment that they're having trouble commenting in, but they texted me. It was that a business manager leader is experiencing the older generation that he's recruiting, which may have been there longer for a longer period of time. And this is what we were trying to say before, I think, is that their pay and benefits may grossly skew some of the numbers as bringing in a younger, less experienced worker, and it skews that cost benefit analysis. And they're asking is that, how do you suggest you find the balance? Okay. And I think that at least my comment on this is that, yes, a worker that's been with you maybe 20 years, right? There is a certain amount of pay or experience that they bring if they've moved up to a leadership position, right? So one of the things that happens, to go to Brian's point, is that once they get to that position, how do you maybe have a conversation with them about where do they want to go in their let's say, the last 5 to 10 years of their career. Okay.
Right.
And do they want to grind? And that's got to be part of an overall thought process about like I said, in corporate America, you move up the ladder, and once you reach a point, you're going to move out, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the small to medium-sized businesses could have a plan of not moving up, but how do you move up and how do you move down? Because that is really the key. In my opinion, the younger workforce, has a lot of resources available to them to, market themselves and utilize their enthusiasm, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think as part of the leadership plan is that you've got to think about the continuum, right? Like it's the idea and the cost of bringing new employees on at $4,500 an employee. The longer you keep them, the cheaper that number becomes. That's the simple math of it, right?
So we're going to start to wrap up, and I think what you said is absolutely, and one of the things you're pushing on, Dennis, too, is that there needs to be an overall change of thinking, and I think that the small and medium-sized businesses can really push this thinking along. There's a company I want to shout out to, which is Home Depot, has been in this game of fighting and champion and lobbying pre-retirees as fantastic workforce, and they have been pushing the government to make changes on the laws of retirement laws and things of that nature. And I think that a small and medium-sized business can create disruption if they have a really amazing strategy and plan that encompasses how do you best utilize pre-retirees and how to take them eloquently through the agent and the wish to just go lighter now, to still give back, and how to do that with such eloquence and dignity would be fantastic than just saying here's the early retirement, right? There's got to be a better way. And I think small and medium-sized businesses can certainly do that. And by talking to the accelerators, they can find out how they do that. And on that note, I'm going to go and just pose the last question, and then we will wrap up this broadcast. Okay, so just hold on. Here we go.
What are some of the key differences between pre-retirees and the younger workforce, and how can small and medium-sized businesses leverage these differences for stability and growth?
So there you go. I'm gonna throw this one at you, Dennis. Take us out.
So I think that's really kind of the question, right? Is how do you? And I think when we really think about it, is that that is sometimes what a group like the accelerators can bring to a company, is give you that lens, as Jenn likes to say, about from the outside looking in. And it's an effort. It takes a fine line when you're trying to balance that stuff. And for the small to medium-sized business owners, when you're fully involved in day-to-day operations, or that business leader is involved in day-to-day operations, sometimes you need some assistance in doing that. And I think that's what we can bring to you.
Brian, any final words before we head out?
Yeah, I just think I would say, a lot of things we talked about today. So the younger worker is going to be aggressive. They want growth opportunities. They potentially, because of, their upbringing and some of the experiences they've already had, they want to travel. They want time. They want to take sabbaticals. They want everything, and they want to get paid for it, which is great because, they're living the lives that I hope that I come back and live. But the older adult is a little bit more secure. They kind of are stabilized, and they just may want to be, and again, the ones we're talking about, the golden nuggets, the ones we're talking about, they just want to give back. They want to have something to do. You said it a little while ago, Jenn. We're retiring. We've gone our whole lives thinking we're going to retire, between 62 and 65, and nothing's really changed on that, except that we're living a lot longer today. So, you 6 months after you retire and you've, done every chore around the house that you thought you were going to do, you've picked up on your rest. Now you want to go back and give back to something. You want to have a purpose in life, something to get up for and go out. So I want to give one example. My uncle lived in California, and he moved back to the state of New York. He owned his own business for many years, worked very, very hard. And he came back, he was retired, he was financially, pretty well off, but he wanted to do something. So he saw that the local YMCA was hiring. He put his application in and he started there, and he worked at the desk. He took some photos. But the impact that he really had was on the head of the YMCA. He really helped her, mentored her to how she worked with her employees, how she worked with management, how she set up the place for the customers. And she ended up getting promoted twice under his tutelage. And he wanted nothing in return except to just give back. There are people out there like that can come into your environment, truly help you. And we believe that we have a plan that can help you attract those employees.
Excellent. And Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, Brian kind of hit on all the points, when you talk about the key differences between pre-retirees and the younger workforce. And I would say that in the same vein, there's a lot of similarities as well. And it all really just circles back to what we try to teach small and medium-sized business to innovate in this regard, and not, we have lots of ideas how you can create a workforce that is more flexible. Large businesses are not doing it. Whether you're a retiree, a younger worker wanting to take a sabbatical and travel, whether you're a parent who wants to take some time off to be with your kids, small to medium-sized business, and what we try to teach them is to innovate in all of these areas. We have some great ideas.
Excellent. So on that note here, this will close off another amazing, informative episode of Employ to Innovate, on how you can leverage pre-retirees for growth, stability, and everything else. And it can be a disruptor if done properly for small and medium-sized businesses. So on that note, we will bid you a farewell. Good night, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Great.